How's it going? Today I wanted to talk to you guys about shunning and why that is not the right word to use for what we call the ban in the Amish. The translation is not quite right, you know. So if you look up the definition of shunning, it says to pretty much make somebody feel like they're invisible. Like they're discarded, like you don't want nothing to do with them. In the Amish, that is not the way it was, at least not in my community for the ban, for shunning. I'm going to call it shunning from here on out when I'm talking about it because I'm so used to it. It's just a habit at this point. And I don't know what other word to use. But just know that when I say shunning, I don't mean what you are thinking if you have been raised English. It's not quite the same thing. Some people think shunning is so bad. Well, the ban is a period of time where you're banned from participating in certain activities with other members. It's like a members-only club. If your privileges are revoked, you can't get in. Well, you can't eat with other members. Obviously, you can't have, intimate relations with your wife if you're in the band, if she's a member, and she would have to be unless you were both in the band. You can't pay another member. They won't accept your money. But I have had it happen before where I have attempted to buy something. I think it was like a sandwich or something at an auction. And it was a little lunch table set up by the Amish. And I said, give me a cheeseburger and a Mountain Dew or whatever it was. I'm sure it was a Mountain Dew. And they were like, we can't take your money. I mean, after they handed me the food, they were like, tried to pay them. They're like, we can't take your money. And I thought maybe it was like a thing where they weren't behind the lunch counter, so maybe if someone else was getting the money, they might have just accepted it, but they were like, no, we can't take your money. But they let me have the food. So if they were totally shunning me, they would not have given me my meal, if that makes sense. You can still talk to them, shun members, if you're a member. Everybody interprets differently how to react to a shunned person, though. Some people go beyond the rules. If you have somebody in your community that's really mean, they might just ostracize somebody and make fun of them, put them down, whatever. But that is not what it's called for. So it's a period of time to give you reflection so that you can repent for what you have done wrong. And that when at the end of your shunning period, you get on your knees and you ask the Lord to forgive you and the church and the Lord to have patience with you in the future as you try to do better. It's in hopes that when you do that, you will actually mean it because of that period of time where you reflected upon what you had done wrong. Thank you. So there's been a lot of confusion on this shunning topic, and some people think it means you're shunned forever. Some people think I got kicked out of my home, kicked out of my community. I only got shunned for 2 weeks. 2 weeks was the minimum sentence, and that's because you can only get shunned or unshunned at church, and we only have church every 2 weeks. At the end of church, before we sing the final hymn, the bishop always makes an announcement. He will say, for example, the next church services are to be held at Abe Yoder's in 2 weeks, Lord willing. And then sometimes he will say, and the brothers and sisters can remain seated after the hymn is over. And so we'll sing the hymn, and then everybody files out except the baptized members. So if you're not baptized, you really don't know what goes on behind those closed doors, and you've never actually experienced real shunning. A lot of communities and families still shun their kids for leaving, even if they're not baptized, but it's not technically shunning. It's not illegal shunning. It's just the family's interpretation. If you're baptized, you're not supposed to tell your younger buddies or brothers or anybody anything that goes on, because if they're not mature enough to be members, they're not mature enough to know what goes on. You might hear rumors before you get baptized about what it's like, but you will never know until you're there. So the day that my shunning kicked in was 2 weeks after the day of my drinking incident. And all day at church, it drug on forever. I had this just weighing on me. And the final hymn was sang, everybody filed out, and Owen Dotweiler says, where there's a vineyard, there's always work to be done, pruning, weeds to be pulled, and the same is the case in our church.
a young man came to us and told us that he went and bought some beer and he gave it to, his buddies. And so, we bring this before you, and we ask that this young man give us the room. And then he said my name. I went outside. I waited for about 10 minutes while they did a vote, and everybody was okay with shunning me, which wasn't a surprise. And Alvin Raber comes out and said, okay, you can go home. You are now officially shunned, and you are not able to eat lunch with us. So I went home, and before lunch, I just booked it out of there. So I went home, and I was hungry. So I wasn't supposed to touch the food without it being handed to me, but I didn't know what else to do. So I went and got a loaf of bread and a jug of milk, and I made me some chocolate milk and a sandwich, and I just never told anybody, and it didn't seem to hurt them. I'm going to have to do a part 2 on this one as well. Welcome to what shunning felt like, part 2. So after I went home, I made me some food, cleaned up all the mess so that nobody would know, and just kind of hung out. I wasn't allowed to go to the singing that evening. Obviously, I was grounded as well, or, shunning, part of that is you can't go to a singing. So I wasn't allowed to see my girlfriend, and that was probably the hardest part for me. Me and my buddy Lester both had girlfriends up in Ashland, and we would only see them like every other week or so because it was expensive to hire a driver to go see them. That was actually the reason we were drinking together that afternoon, because we normally hang out together in another community, and we weren't going to see our girlfriends that weekend, and we were bored, so that's why we were drinking. The next day I went to work. I worked all that first week like normal. I sat off to myself a little bit to eat my lunch, and kind of worked by myself a little bit, which I didn't mind, and until I had to hand Checky a level on Friday of that first week. And then the second week I didn't get picked up, but that was okay. I didn't mind that either. And it was, I think, the middle of November, and I wanted to go deer hunting, but my dad said that it wouldn't be good if I got a deer during that time. So I told him I'm going anyway. I'm just not shooting anything. So 2 weeks later, church was at my house. And it was kind of interesting because when you're shunned, you have to go to this little separate room and where the preachers are and take counseling from them on what you've done. And the funny thing is, it was actually my room. So I went up to talk to the preachers, and I sat on my bed while the preachers were sitting on a bench facing me. It was just the weirdest experience of all of this was that I could almost laugh out loud, like it was my own room. It felt so weird to have all the preachers sitting in my room while I'm sitting on my bed and they're counseling me on drinking. So I wasn't told that my sentence was going to be 2 weeks. I was just told that I was shunned. So after services were over, I had to leave the room because I was considered a shunned member. I wasn't allowed to be there for, the discussion. So they did a vote, and everybody agreed to unshun me, and that I was repentant enough. So I had to basically go back inside and do a confession, and then I was considered a member again. And the Saturday a week before I got unshunned, the preachers came to see me, and they asked me if I had apologized to Leroy Baller for tearing his clothesline down. And I said no, and they said, well, you're going to have to. So I went and did that.